In what feels unprecedented year after year, we are facing an existential threat to humanity and all life as we know it due to the warming of our climate and its effects. We know the continued warming of the planet is rooted in the basic functioning of the capitalist system, mainly the burning of coal, oil, and gas. And we know that the oil companies and all the corporations that rely on these carbon-based products for their production, from pharmaceuticals to fertilizers to plastics to animal feeds and much more, have a deeply vested interest in continuing those practices. The climate emergency is already upon us. It will get much worse if things continue on the same path for much longer. But we are already facing global catastrophes that have been more severe, more quickly than scientists have predicted. 1 million plant and animal species are threatened with extinction. We have lost half of the world's corals, and we lose forest areas the size of 27 football fields every minute. In many parts of the world, the lives of tens of millions of people are being destroyed as they are driven from their homes by extreme weather events due to climate disruption, massive flooding, droughts, or extreme temperatures, making growing crops and raising animals impossible. These are not isolated incidents. The global daily temperature is shattering records multiple times a year. We can only expect an acceleration of the climate crisis in the months and years to come. An estimated 20 million people per year are displaced due to climate change. That number is predicted to reach over 1 in every 50 people by 2050. We already see the response of the US government to people fleeing the violence of climate change, poverty, and the imperialist-backed regimes in their countries. Increased militarized border walls, deportation centers, and increased incarceration for migrants. In the US, like other parts of the world, politicians and corporations have actively covered up the extent of the climate crisis and diverted many people's attention away from the systematic destruction of the environment. Instead, they focus on those forced to flee their homes due to climate disruption and the violence in their home countries, the very same people experiencing the most disastrous effects of the climate crisis. Turning people's blame against immigrants, climate refugees, and one another takes the focus off of the real perpetrators of these crimes against humanity and keeps us divided by nationality, race, and religion. Global conflicts are directly tied to the climate crisis, as both cause and effect. As climate events reduce the amount of land and resources available to us, so-called world leaders are ramping up military spending and preparing for increased conflicts that they will try to get us to support and fight. For instance, the US, China, and Russia already have military forces stationed in the Arctic waiting to take advantage of new trade routes and access to more fossil fuels and other resources. Increased wars and militaries intensify the climate crisis by disrupting food supply and creating an even deeper reliance on fossil fuel use. The US Department of Defense is already the world's single largest institutional producer of greenhouse gases in the world. This is the situation we confront today, and we cannot ignore it. We are armed with the growing body of scientific analysis that clearly demonstrates the threat the capitalist system poses to humanity. So, if the science is clear and the effects more and more rampant, why is nothing being done about it? Capitalism is the primary driver of our climate crisis and ecological destruction. Going back in history, the invention of the steam engine in the early 18th century transformed European society. Machines replaced manual labor, and the ability to mass-produce weaponry and other tools expanded. The Industrial Revolution was made possible due to breakthroughs in the use of fossil fuels. Thus, the history of capitalism and its success is deeply intertwined with the extraction and use of fossil fuels. They became means to concentrate power and quickly build industrial empires that could then use even more fossil fuels, a completely unsustainable yet profitable cycle. Fossil fuels are convenient for the system of capitalism. They concentrate lots of energy in a small space, can be stored and transported relatively easily, and can be owned, controlled, and sold as a commodity, unlike wind or solar energy. Moreover, fossil fuels are abundant and easy to extract and burn, making them cheap. The capitalists can mechanize their use of fossil fuels for their factories and transportation systems without concern for the future impacts of the pollution, the cancer, and the waste that is generated from fossil fuels. Greenhouse gas emissions are not the only consequence of this. Hence why we have many other environmental problems due to plastics and toxins, etc. Since the 1970s, climate scientists have known that burning fossil fuels is the driving cause of climate change. But capitalists dug their heels in and funded campaigns to hide and deny the scientific findings linking climate change to fossil fuel usage. They fought with their billions of dollars to keep their fossil fuel economy going with the backing of states around the world. After all, the capitalist class would lose trillions of dollars in sunk costs, decades-long extraction plans, financial capital investments, and untapped fossil fuels. What's more is they would have to invest trillions of dollars more in alternative energy resources and new scientific development to pivot. At its core, capitalism relies on economic growth. It commodifies everything. A capitalist must view a forest solely as the amount of money they could make from the wood of the trees. Capitalists must grow or die. Thus, more and more goods must be produced, and the profits made from this production must be reinvested in more efficient ways to produce more goods. In fact, the output of CO2, carbon dioxide, is accelerating. Since 2000, CO2 emissions have been increasing an average of 2% every year. And there's only been 2 years when we've seen a decline. In 2009, there was a decline of about 1.6%, and in 2020, with a decline of 4.9%. In both of those years, the only reason emissions decreased was because global production took huge hits, in the global recessions of 2008 and during COVID in 2020. Every year, the energy demands of the capitalist system continue to grow, as machines continue to replace human labor in many industries. Since 2018, the global energy demands of capitalism have grown about 3% every year, and there is no sign of any of this slowing down. The vast majority, about 85% of that energy, still comes from fossil fuels, which means every year the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere continues to grow. And even as more renewable sources come online, and they're not replacing fossil fuels, they're just allowing for greater energy consumption. Even with the state control of resources or attempts at technological solutions, these types of solutions can at best decrease the pace of growth of CO2 emissions, while also shifting the blame over who is allegedly responsible for the emissions. Yes, we see the capitalists proposing green technology like electric vehicles, solar panels, and even carbon capture. But the scale of these ideas falls so short. It allows individuals who feel climate doomed to purchase new technology or feel morally relieved, all while the large-scale energy infrastructure goes on burning fossil fuels. It's not impossible to imagine a capitalist world that eventually makes the shift to rely on renewable energy. Perhaps. But the best chance humanity has at surviving all of this cannot be carried out under the timeline of this system. That is a death march. There is no way to reduce emissions without reducing production, and thereby without this system losing trillions of dollars in capital. That's why emissions keep going up. In addition, the production of goods under capitalism are uncoordinated and chaotic. Across all industries, no company knows the real demand of their products and have no idea how much their competitors will produce. This chaotic production leads to enormous crises of overproduction, where each capitalist overproduces to try to capture more of the market. This means much of that production is wasted and completely unsustainable. In fact, it is estimated that more than 10% of annual greenhouse gas emissions come from entirely wasted production. It's completely unsustainable and goes against all logic of how an ecosystem functions. In the case of carbon dioxide, there are clear limits on how much we can release back into the atmosphere without causing unintended consequences that jeopardizes the ecological conditions in which life thrives. Capitalism is a parasitic system, and it is devouring the basis of its existence. It isn't guided by long-term survival. Its health is dependent on constant expansion, which requires more energy production. Everything is guided by one thing: profitability. And that profitability is short term. We do not live on a planet with infinite resources. And even if we did, we would still burn to death by the warming. Those who control industrial production today don't have a choice other than to proceed on this suicidal course. They are guided by the demands of capitalism. Every decision made by those who control industrial production around the planet is guided by one goal: to maximize profit. If they fail at that, they are out of the game. The uncoordinated production from competing capitalists means that there is no way for this economic model to lead to a coordinated transition to rapidly phase out fossil fuels. And we can't rely on politicians or elections to bring about the changes we need. They are the guardians of a system that must expand. Politicians like Joe Biden made big promises to halt the expansion of this insanity. He said,
"No more drilling on federal lands, period."
But once elected, it was business as usual, with the continued construction of pipelines and opening up new areas for exploitation. This system has no exit strategy to this crisis. All around the world, ruling powers are not preparing to solve the climate crisis, but to double down on it. They are racing across the globe, competing for what's left, and preparing for more wars and greater conflicts and instability, only to be met with a more militarized and authoritative responses. The damage caused by the capitalist system to the environment is already so great that many more catastrophes are coming no matter what. And we know how this system responds to massive wildfires or droughts or hurricanes, mass displacement, mass homelessness, and massive misery. And if there's any redevelopment afterwards, it has nothing to do with the needs of the people who have been affected, but only to do with the investments and profits. The crises will keep on coming, and capitalism will only be able to react, not proactively address the crises to come. Given the cascading crises, we need a more holistic solution to our problem. The crisis we confront today is the most serious one that humans have ever faced. The billionaires can fantasize about colonizing Mars, but our home is not theirs to destroy. As one of the co-chairs of the IPCC said, any further delay in concerted global action will miss a brief and rapidly closing window to secure a livable future. And we cannot look to them for action. We have seen those at the table at the climate summits respond to the mounds of scientific evidence with empty promises and promote the continued destruction of our Earth. The possibilities that are presented to us can feel and look grim, but these are under the assumption of maintaining a capitalist system. Imagine if we did not have to sustain the growth of profits and a growing economy based on fossil fuels. What would be possible? What problems could we tackle? What possibilities would open up through our collective efforts? In the words of Greta Thunberg,
"And if solutions within this system are so impossible to find, then maybe we should change the system itself."
that is exactly what we need to do. We need to stop emitting more carbon into the air right now. And the problem isn't simply that we need to reduce emissions, we need net negative carbon to reduce the total level of CO2 in the atmosphere. This means we need to reorganize our food and energy production to make that possible, while still meeting the needs of all people and life on this planet. The solutions to do this are not a pipe dream. In fact, there are plenty of possible solutions and creative new ideas waiting on the sidelines ready to be implemented. We already have vast knowledge of how to reorganize agriculture that not only can produce more food, but can lead to net negative emissions, reducing carbon in the atmosphere every year. This coordination of food production and distribution has to happen at the global level to work. The technology and resources for organizing renewable energy on a global scale already exists. Worldwide renewable energy infrastructure could be built without regard for lost profits. The technology for electric mass transit already exists and could lead to a massive reduction in carbon dioxide emissions when implemented. Implementing new technology that can sequester carbon and provide energy to all could expand the number of people engaged and actively addressing the problem. We would make education accessible and prioritize jobs to meet the needs of the planetary crisis. Under a different system, none of these solutions have to mean mass unemployment for any workers whatsoever. If workers happen to work in a death industry like oil extraction or automobile production, these workers can have new jobs without any loss in wages. With the working class in power, workers will never have to be sacrificed in order to make the changes we need. The solutions to the climate crisis are waiting to be implemented. What is stopping us is a system that does not allow us to implement these in any coordinated, sustainable way, the system of capitalism. To save ourselves and our future, we don't just need a transition of energy sources, we need a transition of power. We need socialism, and to get there, we need a revolution.